Okay, this review is going to have spoilers in it, so if you haven't finished watching Stranger Things Season 3, go do that, then come back. Okay, my name is Mike Snow, and Stranger Things Season 3 was great. It's kind of shocking that they're able to keep this going through every season. I really thought that it was going to break down by this point and not be entertaining, but right now it's still my favorite television show. It's absolutely great. I knew at the end of Season 2, when the US military left, that they were going to have to deal with the repercussions of that, and the Russians have apparently somehow moved in to Hawkins and are doing the same experiments that the US government were doing. And in this season, they don't really seem to be referencing Firestarter like the first one or aliens like the second one. Although there is a sequence sort of like when Bishop goes into the tunnels to go take out the aliens, they crawl around in ducts or vents a lot, so maybe that's an Aliens reference. They seem to be referencing in the plot of Season 3 Invasion of the Body Snatchers, which is kind of odd because that movie was made in the 50s, it was remade in the 70s and the 90s, but I don't think, to my knowledge, it was remade in the 1980s. But anyway, the Mind Flayer, apparently from the previous season, was not locked out of Hawkins. A piece of it sort of functions like The Thing in the John Carpenter movie, where, unlike a human being where we just have tissue or matter if it gets excised or cut off somehow, the Mind Flayer actually functions like each individual piece of it is its own entity. So if you chop off a little bit of it that was still here in our world and not on the other side in the other dimension, in the Upside Down, it can still exist in a way, and I think it might actually be considered trapped, like imprisoned on our side, and is trying to get back or trying to open the door and bring all of its friends over here. And in order to do this, it takes on yet another role. I love the protean nature of these creatures, where every season they do something a little bit different, and this time the Mind Flayer decides to take over people's minds, but not one person's mind like Will. He decides to do it to dozens of people around town, hence the Invasion of the Body Snatchers reference. The fact that the Russians are also trying to move in here and open the gate, again references that sort of commie paranoia that was going on in the 50s and to some degree in the 1980s, when the Cold War went through one of its peaks and people were getting upset and worried about communist takeover in the country. Although, in a way, I really wish that they'd spent more time doing this Invasion of the Body Snatchers. They called them flayed because the Mind Flayer flays their minds. And the flayed, I really think, could have been a lot creepier and a lot weirder, but because the plot is pulling everybody in so many different directions, I think that they didn't really have enough time in order to actually sit there and make it truly like a slow-burning eeriness or creepiness. But here, they do it for like the first couple of episodes, but then they're pulled off in other directions and they do other things. It's amazing to think about the plot of the show is not bad in any way, and it's always interesting and told in a very lightning-paced way that keeps you really engaged. Although the plot is fairly basic. I mean, I don't want to say it's simplistic exactly, it's just not something we haven't seen before in many movies, especially from the 1980s. You know, the plot is really sort of a vehicle, an interesting vehicle, for the real draw to the show, which is the characters. They have created the cast of some of the most exciting, fun, interesting characters I've ever seen, and crucially for a television show, they have that it factor where you want to keep going and seeing them. You want to spend time with these people. These characters sort of become your friends when you watch this show, and it's just so much fun to sit there and see their trials and travails and their love lives, and their personalities are what carry the show from scene to scene, not the monsters or not everything going on in the background. And the characters are just as entertaining in this one as they've ever been. In fact, I think they've actually upped the humor factor. I think this might be the funniest season. There's this great moment where Lucas goes through this comical little diatribe about New Coke and how much he loves it, which kind of makes him, I mean, that's horrible. I mean, New Coke was terrible, wasn't it? But Dustin has apparently found a girlfriend in science camp, and everything about it makes it seem like maybe she's imaginary and just bragging to his friends about having found a girlfriend. throughout the entire season, and then it gets paid off at the very end, and we find out that she's actually real. And they go through this hilarious moment where she demands that Dustin sort of sing their song together, which is, of course, The Never-Ending Story, one of the great fantasy movies of the 1980s. And it's just a beautiful moment where there's this sort of crescendo of action going on, where a number of people are in danger, and it's in the last episode, and anyone could die at any moment, and yet it just beautifully and perfectly cuts in this moment of hilarity that's probably the funniest moment in the entire show, I think. And the fact that they were able to do that without undercutting either the humor or the horror action is beautiful and sign of real talent and skill from the Duffer Brothers. They did a great job with that. I just want to I love watching these people talk. I just loved sitting there and watching their conversations because they're all so charismatic and interesting. Probably the standout of the entire season was Maya Hawke, Ethan Hawke and Uma Thurman's daughter. She plays a character called Robin, and she's great. She is perfectly integrated into the show. A lot of times I've seen TV shows where they try to add a new character, during the next season, and it doesn't quite work. They don't quite fit into everything, and you just say to yourself, "Hey, I like these old characters. I don't want to mess around with some new person." But they've managed to do this beautifully in both season 2 and season 3. They just introduce these new characters, integrate them perfectly into the show, and Maya Hawke is really funny. Her character is really smart, and she just works beautifully together with the cast. I really liked her. If I could think of some criticisms of the show, they'd really be pretty much nitpicks. I mean, not really major things, just kind of like, if I was forced at gunpoint by the Russians to do it. I would say that the drama between some of the characters is sort of forced. It feels very contrived soap opera stuff at times. After the end of season 2, Michael and Elle have apparently been dating for the past 6 months or so, which obviously we kind of figured was going to happen. And Hopper becomes a real asshole and begins to break apart their relationship because he doesn't want his adopted daughter to be dating Mike. It just sort of irks him. So he arranges for Mike to lie to Elle, which prompts her, along with Max's urgings, to break up with Mike, which is kind of weird because we don't get to see them actually be together. I mean, we get to do that for like one episode and then that's it. That kind of feels unfair. I mean, it's okay to make us sort of tease their relationship and keep them apart in the first 2 seasons, but I kind of thought they would be together at this point. It just feels so silly. They kind of frame it like Elle wants to explore the world outside of the relationship with Mike and that he's been monopolizing her time. But he didn't do that intentionally. It's not his fault. And he's like 14. He's not mature enough to know that she should have like friends and things outside of the relationship. And she didn't seem to want it. She seems sort of like pushed on by the actions of others, especially Max. She's sort of like pushed into it by Max, who kind of comes off as kind of a jerk in some of the early episodes of the season, but again, that's fairly minor. Billy, Max's brother, is back, and he's now sort of the main face of the villainy of the Flayed, and he is great, just as great as he was in the last season. He is a perfect Billy Zabka 80s bully asshole. He's just I just love seeing this guy, and they actually gave him some depth, which I like, because so many people I've seen on the internet just despise this guy. But, you can't tell a good story without giving some depth to your characters, especially the villains, who have the most poignant feelings and backstory of everyone there that sort of transform them into the evil character they became. And we get to see his early life and that he was just a normal kid years ago. And at one point, there's this beautiful moment where Elle actually goes in to Billy's memories and tries to figure out what caused him to become this person and try to remove the mind flayer from his brain, and actually succeeds at sort of touching his heart and getting him to overcome things. And there's this incredible moment, maybe the best of season 3, where Billy has actually sacrificed his life in order to save Elle and the other kids, when he briefly regains control of his mind and is killed by the Mind Flayer. And that's just such a beautiful moment to turn this hateful, evil character that everyone despised in the previous season into sort of a pitiful victim in this one. It kind of makes you think that anyone is sort of on this wheel of being victimizer and victim. And in the words of a song from the 1980s, some people want to use you, some people want to be used by you. And it just sort of goes back and forth depending on the situation, what's going to happen. And I love that they gave this character this triumphant moment, although obviously he's dead now, so it's, he's not going to come back. Overall, Season 3 of Stranger Things just worked beautifully, and I realize it's not really because of the plot, which at times can be, I don't want to say pedestrian exactly because it sounds insulting, but it just seems fairly perfunctory and straightforward at moments, and nothing really makes me want to come back to it because of the evil monster plot, so to speak. It's just a convenient sort of shroud of fog or mystery around everything that makes it a little bit less mundane than it otherwise would be. It's the characters that make this show, and the characters are not only as entertaining as they were a few years ago, they seem to get more entertaining as every year passes. The actors just seem to get better at who these characters are, and the writers know how to write for them. And I just love listening to this rapid-fire dialogue, because it really keeps you... It's just fun to see the mixture of humor and analysis of the situation they're going through and how to fix things. These characters are some of the best I've ever seen on TV, and I just want to keep coming back to see more and more of them. As a final note, at the end of the season, it seems maybe that Hopper dies, which kind of seemed unnecessary. I'm going to have to watch the last episode again, but it seems like Joyce turns a key in the evil Russian base underground, which, by the way, looks a little bit more like a 70s movie than an 80s movie with this base, like a late 60s, early 70s James Bond secret base, not an 80s secret base. But anyway, and she turns a key that ends up closing the portal that the Russians are trying to open. And she kind of inadvertently kills Hopper during this, and it kind of seems a little contrived. Like she could have said, "Hey, Hopper, run away from the big explosion quickly so I can close it," Like did she absolutely have to do it right then? I don't know about that. But anyway, it seems like maybe they're teasing that he's still alive and somehow trapped in Russia, and he's going to come back in the next season, and I really do hope that happens. But Season 3 was great. I loved seeing all the relationship drama going on, and Hopper and Joyce finally trying to come together. They don't end up coming together at the end. I mean, they kind of seem to start a little bit something, but they end up sort of going through the whole moonlighting, fighting back and forth with one another throughout the entire season, and at the end they sort of recognize their feelings for one another. I think this season really included a sort of 80s-ification of the aesthetics. In the first two seasons, one of my complaints was that this kind of looks like it could have happened at any time. There's a kind of drabness and a brown and gray, and aside from some occasional ancient technology, it really looks like, this could have... I mean, it doesn't feel like the 1980s. People aren't wearing things most of the time that look like it. Only every now and again did you get that. But in this one, they went all crazy with the 1980s. They began to go with big, bright, bold colors everywhere. The mall and the 4th of July celebrations set are just giant explosions of riotous color, which really was the garish, in-your-face 1980s. It was a very bright decade somehow. I think it caused eye damage eventually, and that's why people changed it in 1990. But they did a great job, and it just looks beautiful just by focusing on that aesthetic quality of everything that was going on, especially in the mall, which, ironically enough, while watching it, seeing the mall crush all the mom and pop stores and Hawkins, now the malls are dying 30 years later and being replaced by something new, and the malls themselves have turned into these desolate wastelands, and that was kind of fun to see. But anyway, I've rambled long enough. It was absolutely great. It was an incredible season. The characters are still popping, still exciting. They've gotten even better than they were in the first two seasons. They've integrated new characters. The plot is still fascinating. And it's just funny, interesting, scary, Everything about it is well done, except for the digital effects. They should have had practical effects if they wanted to make this an 80s movie, but that's a quibble. My name is Michael. Please take a look at some of these videos that I've listed here, including Day of the Dead, a review of a movie that I made that was actually referenced directly in Season 3 of Stranger Things. At the very first episode, we actually get to see the opening of Day of the Dead as they sneak into a movie theater and see that. And I think there was an audio reference to the soundtrack of the Day of the Dead at one point, I heard. But anyway, take a look at that video. Please subscribe if you want to see more of these reviews, and please like this video if you liked it, and please comment below and tell me what you thought about Stranger Things Season 3. If you thought it was interesting, if you thought it was well done, if you hated it, if you prefer the first 2 seasons, if you think they're out of ideas, because I don't think they are. I think they're doing a great job, and they're going to continue to do a great job into the next 2 seasons. Yeah, my name is Michael. Thank you very much, and have a good night.
Day of the Dead.